MakeReal specialises in creating immersive learning solutions across a range of technologies. To download their latest academic paper on how to turn learners into activists, visit makereal.co.uk/activists. Ageism is a scar on the community. As an older person myself, I of course abhor it. But really, people, don't you sometimes get fed up with all us old gits constantly banging on and on? Isn't it time we heard from youth? Welcome to The Learning Hack, a podcast about the people and technologies that are creating the future of learning. I'm John Helmer.
Now guess what?
Learning is cool. Learning is cool. Learning is cool. I'm learning.
Learning is fun.
And knowledge is power. Knowledge. Education.
Every year, the Learning Guild in the US picks their 30 under 30, young professionals who embody the knowledge, skills and drive needed by today's modern learning leaders. Learning Technologies Conference in the UK does a similar thing. Our hardened old arteries are annually enlivened by this vital infusion of new blood. We've had a rising star on the Learning Hack, but we've never had a 30 under 30. Until now. Kate Fitzgerald, Head of Fact. Tell us about her.
Hack Facts.
Her passion for learning, says Dinye Hernanda in her LinkedIn biography, brought her from a muddy school field in Indonesia to the boardrooms of Germany's top companies. With a double master's in international management, she began her working life supporting organisations in accelerating change through digital transformation. Realising, however, that investing in people often had a bigger and more sustainable impact, she switched to L&D. Dinye is now Senior Learning and Development Manager at HeyJobs.
Hey, Jay Curtis, Head of Themes. What did we talk about?
John, it's a long time since you were young yourself.
That's true.
A very, very long time.
Yes.
Just saying, that's probably why you were so interested in the difference of perspective between people of Dinye's generation and your own superannuated, antediluvian, crumbly, crinkly...
OK, that's a disciplinary.
And you also talked about what it was like to progress in business for a young woman of Indonesian heritage and the challenges she has had to overcome.
Thank you, Jay. I'm really grateful to Laura Overton, a good friend of the podcast, for introducing me to Dinye. This was a really interesting conversation, and I think it's heartening for all of us to know that there are such intelligent, creative people coming up in the world of learning. It might even make you somewhat hopeful about the future. But first, if you want us to continue bringing the brightest and best to you on the Learning Hack, and if you want to get early access to exclusive bonus content, as well as other brilliant benefits we haven't thought of yet, go to patreon.com/learninghack, and for less than the price of a monthly coffee, sign up to the Fellowship of the Hack. So, Dinye Hernanda, it's great to have you on the podcast. Welcome to the Learning Hack.
Thank you, John. It's a pleasure.
We met in Berlin at Online Educa. It sounds so posh, doesn't it? We met in Berlin, where you were talking about your work with diverse hypergrowth startups. Now, that sounds even posher. But let's start at the beginning. How did you get into the learning profession? People of my age didn't really start life thinking I want to work with learning technologies when I grow up because it didn't exist as a job. But it was kind of there when you turned up. Was it different for you?
I mean, if we want to start from the very beginning, my mom is a teacher. My dad is a mechanic. So, learning and technology, that's combined into one. Yeah. But honestly, no, I didn't know about L&D or learning technology or any kind of this stuff. I kind of fell into it. I started in digital transformation team. So I was part of innovation team in big corporations, introducing digital processes or digital products. But then I fell in love with the helping out people come to terms with change, learning the right kind of skills. So that's how I learned, there is such a thing called learning and development, and you can actually have a job in that area.
But going further back, what were your kind of educational qualifications, and did they point you in a direction like this at all?
Yes. So I studied business, very normal, but I learned programming or coding when I was 14. So at that time, it was quite an interesting profile for a lot of companies, finding a business graduate who understand actually how technology works, not from superficial level, but also know how to do things. So that's how I get into this space between business and technology.
Okay, so could you talk a bit more about your career in learning to date, culminating in your current position as Senior Learning and Development Manager at HeyJobs? How did you get to this place?
Yes, sure. So as mentioned, I started in corporate. So it was a good start as a learning professional because then I got to be a part of an established team. So I saw how the work looks like and look at other learning professionals also do their job. But then after, I think like 2.5 years, I'm like, I wanted to look for an environment where I could do different stuff, where the pace of work is a bit faster, where I could experiment without having to wait 3 months until it get approved, like how it's done in corporate. So that's why I said, you know what, let's try out this hyper growth startups thing. And then I started to become like the first person in L&D. So before HeyJob, I was part of 2 startups. There were around 120-ish employees. So startup here also doesn't mean like 7 people in the garage, but actually already like 120, 140 people. And HeyJob is 400 employee company. So I started as the first person in L&D, and then I just thought I wanted to learn something more. I wanted to learn not only how to create L&D from scratch, but also how to scale it up, how to make sure that it's not only nice to look at, but could be implemented for different countries, different branches in the company. So yeah.
So you were selected for the prestigious 30 Under 30 program run by the Learning Guild. That's the US version, not London Learning Technologies. They have their own 30 Under 30. Why do you think the Learning Guild chose you for that? And can you talk about the process of being selected and what it's led to since?
A good question. Why did they choose me? Although to be honest, when I got the announcement, when I received the announcement, I was in surprise, not to brag, but I think what brought me into this, like, 30 Under 30, or this kind of thing, at the beginning of 2021, I was part of the masterclass created by Laura Overton, Michelle Oker, and Shannon Tipton. And it was a really, for me, an eye-opening experience, because then I got to learn with other L&D professionals who are also very much into like, hey, I want to do something different. I want to grow more. I want to be bolder. That's what it's called in the program. And then, so I looked at this 30 Under 30 thing more as a development program for myself, because I thought, if I could get into this kind of circle and then got to meet and chat and learn from other professionals who are eager in their career development, who have done something different in their career or at their work, that would be a nice experience. So the 3 ladies, so Laura, Michelle, and Shannon, helped me with the application. And when, going back to your question, why did they choose me? I think what I also realized during the masterclass is that I do approach things differently when it comes to L&D. It could be because of my cultural background, the fact that I'm an Indonesian living in Germany with all what it entails. It could also be because I didn't come from this traditional L&D who work in HR, but I was actually part of the business. But yeah, so I do realize that during discussion, I would ask, for some people, maybe stupid questions, or like, why did you ask that question? But this kind of questions usually make people think, oh yeah, what was our understanding again about that thing? Or why haven't we thought about that way? And also the fact that I put experimentation, I put a great importance of experimentation in my work. So I think that's also something that I didn't realize was different than other L&D. I didn't realize that, trying things out and never see it as a finished product, but keep iterating on it was not a standard operating procedure.
In your social media post announcing your selection, you specifically thank those who set aside their prejudices and took a chance on me. Can you talk about what it's been like to progress in business for someone with your differences, e.g., you're a woman, you're young, and your Indonesian heritage? Have you kind of encountered difficulties on behalf of all those things?
I think because I grew up in Indonesia, so I spent my first 18 years in Indonesia, I was part of the majority. So I didn't really have this experience of being discriminated as a child and having to go through life in that way. So when I came to Germany, I realized I was different, but I didn't realize how much it will actually affect my daily life. And because I was never this, it never came into my head that if I didn't get something or if I get rejected for certain things, it could be because of how I look like, of how other people perceive me. So it was only later on that I realized that when I get a job or when I get rewarded or get appreciated for certain things, it's because of the people who have set aside their prejudices and also take a chance on me. And this is also something that I only learn later on, usually at work, because as I've said, I usually when I apply for a job and then I get it, I just think, well, it's because I am experienced and credible enough to get this job. And the other way around, if I didn't get it, it's because I'm not qualified enough, probably. And that's it. But then later on, my manager or my colleagues will then tell me after like a few months in the job that, you know what, you are actually like, I'm ashamed of myself of having prejudices towards you. And I really enjoy our collaboration and how we work together and all this kind of stuff. And I usually just smiled, but then at that time I was like, oh, so you did have prejudice. I didn't realize that. I didn't realize that they expected me to be different, I would maybe have difficulties in collaborating with you because your work approach would be different, like your communication style would be different and all this kind of stuff. But yeah, so when I look back, and that's why I mentioned it when I got the 30 Under 30 program, I do realize, and I'm thankful for all these people who have set aside my appearance, my background, my whatever they have in their head when they see me, and actually allow me to grow and give me a lot of autonomy and freedom to do my job and support me in the best way that they can.
So let's focus in on one of those differences in particular, if you like. It sounds terrible, doesn't it? It sounds like I'm picking on you. Your youth, which of course is admirable and enviable for people of my age. And my generation have learned tech hacks that to a degree shape the industry as it is now. I mean, not me personally, I wouldn't take too much credit for shaping the learning tech industry. I'm thinking more of the people that I interview, and we do cover a large age range, and occasionally you have people who are just kind of absolute, they wrote the book, they sort of created this world we're in. So someone of your age, you come to a profession that's already in place, and I'm interested in what your perception of what the old guys did. I mean, there's a lot of hand-wringing on social media about the state of corporate and institutional learning, I should say. A lot of people feel it's a bit broken or things have been set down that perhaps shouldn't have been, that kind of tie us into corners. So I'm really interested in your point of view, coming slightly fresher to this. Where did we go wrong? I'm kind of inviting you, I suppose, to, it's a bit unfair to say, oh, okay, old people, you got it wrong. But in what particular ways do you sort of feel that, in hindsight?
Yeah, I think I could speak on it based on my experience when I was still in corporate. I would say it's not like what you went wrong, I would say from my point of view, what frustrated me when I have to deal with this kind of thing. I remember my first assignment as an L&D professional. My manager at that time told me that, hey, Dinye, we had a leadership discussion, so all the top managers, and then we realized that some of our team leads are lacking skills when it comes to managing team remotely. So this was way before COVID, but the company was spread it all over the world, so that's why they have this kind of setup.
Yeah.
And then she was like, could you please find a couple of trainings, how to train managers to be good at managing remotely. And I just stared at her and I was like, how did you come up with that? Like, how did you, okay. So the training, yes. Why exactly do you think that's the like you need a training? Yeah, because we receive complaint that our employees, they don't feel well managed by their managers, etc., etc. And I guess at that time, she just expected me to just go and research, right? Because we already have a database of trainers, providers that we work with, and just find someone in the catalog that will be able to deliver training in this regard. And then at that time, because I was new, I didn't know about learning needs analysis, about all these very typical L&D terminologies. But at that time, for me, it's just, what's the point of doing work that will not have any impact? And the only thing that I guarantee that my work has an impact is if I know that I'm solving a problem. And for me, I am hired to solve a problem, and that is a business problem. It's not, so even without like, performance consulting or all this kind of stuff that I learned later on in L&D, my first gut reaction to this is, can I go talk to the people and understand if this is actually the problem, that they are lacking skills or knowledge? Can I look at the data? So because I come from product development, that's just kind of how I work. I look at the customer, the end users, who are they? What are their pain points? Is there any data that could help us in determining the exact thing that we need to help, and take it from there? And because I'm also I don't have training as default in my head. So even during my questioning, I never asked them about what kind of training or what kind of learning experience do you expect. I mostly asked them about, how do you actually measure your success as a team lead? What are the KPIs that you are attached to as a measure of your performance, et cetera, et cetera. So I mainly talk about business, which I later learned is that how you are supposed to do it. But at that time, I'm just like, I'm here to solve business problem, and I don't understand this training business. Why are we doing it?
That's so interesting because, obviously you instinctually saw that throwing a course at people was the wrong way to go. Without having read the blog post of Guy Wallace for years and years about performance consulting, whatever, it just seemed kind of wrong off the bat. That is interesting.
Yeah. And I think I was also lucky because at that time, my boss was confused because I'm like, can I actually have like a week or so to go talk and look at the data, et cetera, et cetera? She was confused. I could see it from her facial expression, but she's like, go ahead. And I think that's, if there is anything that the old guys could do better, is also sometimes even maybe you don't understand why the youngsters are approaching things certain way, that you just let them experiment. I mean, of course, guidance was nice. I would also sometimes be reprimanded if I spent too much on the problem space and we need to deliver something here. But I guess that's one example that I could think of right now when I think about my time in corporate and what annoyed me the most at that time. Because every time I would just get asked to build trainings, I'm like, why?
Yeah. I think I should stand up for many of our older interviewees, many of whom will point that to that exact failing of the profession, that there is kind of, and it does seem to me, you look at other professions like kind of, marketing, design, whatever, there's a discovery phase. Product design, there is always a discovery phase, how to research, what's the data, what's the problem, let's find out what it is before we start solutioneering. And you're right, it is a kind of facet of L&D that will lead to, okay, get at some trainings. But really interesting reply that. Struggling to bridge skills gaps within your organisation? Well, you're not alone. Skills is the number one challenge facing organisations today. Discover the power of AI-driven skills ontology management systems. Learn how these systems can help identify current and future skills needs and create personalised and relevant learning experiences. Future-proof your workforce. Identify your hidden superstars. Download the new white paper, Skills Are Your Organisation's Superpower, at learningpool.com. The Learning Hack podcast is supported by Learning News, the learning sector's newswire. Rob and his team are good friends of the podcast, and we really value the help and advice we've had from them, and they do a great job. For the very latest news from around the learning sector, for interviews with learning leaders, the latest from learning sector vendors and features on workplace learning, go to learningnews.com. So what's your general take on the L&D profession at the moment, both good and bad?
I think when I break out of corporate world, that was kind of the first time that I was frustrated. Like there were a couple of things that, why are we doing it this way? But once I was out of the corporate setup and I was able to look at maybe also other areas of work and then implement their practice into L&D, or go into other organizations, how they do it, and then try to experiment and stuff. So at that time, I thought that, everyone is just doing it the same way. But now my eyes are open. There are people who are actually trying out doing things differently. And that would be what I wish, the good things, that the people who are doing things different way, that they would be more spotlighted and highlighted in different stories. Because for me, when I went to conferences, I know what the talking points would be. Let's not do training. Let's stop solutioneering. Let's go deeper into problem. Let's let's understand what business wants. Let's talk about metrics, etc., etc. So I think if you go to enough conferences and read enough articles, you would know what the best practices are, like the tips. But I think what sometimes I miss is the real stories of people, how they do things. And so I'm part of this learning communities called L&D Shakers. They have this series called L&D Backstage. So basically, when an L&D professional just bear everything and say, this is how I design leadership development. This is what we did. This is what we learned. This is where I failed and succeed. This is what we would do the next time. And for me, being an L&D manager in startups, a lot of the things that you learn in corporate cannot be immediately copy and pasted to my context. And having a template or knowing how someone approach step by step in, even when it's different context, or even when it's from a totally different environment and they have a very different, maybe they're coming from conservative industries with a lot of regulation. So it's not something that I could also just do. But I really appreciate this kind of sessions where you really see the step by step of how people do things, so that you could, it's like in scientific journals, you'll find how people do their experiments and they write out how they approach their methodology and stuff. And then you can build on that and put your spin on it and then publish another thing. So I think if L&D community could be that way, like we are open to sharing our works. I mean, of course, taking into account confidentiality and business
yeah.
interest. But if we could have this kind of sharing, so not only the gospel, like you should do this and you should do that, but showing what they do so that we can all learn from each other's experience.
I think you're very right there. A lot of the the conference fair is restating best practice, calling people out for not adhering to best practice. But in some senses, best practice is a Me Too mindset. And we also want to hear about innovation. And the actual kind of cut and thrust and the show and tell that you get when somebody talks through, okay, we had this problem, this is how we approached it, this is what we did, I think is the really interesting stuff. And the confidentiality thing you mentioned there is, I think, an important one, because I've always found when I was a kind of head of marketing that the case studies are what interested me most. You ran into confidentiality all the time. You had to present them in a very terse and rather kind of formulaic way that stopped you getting to the nub of it, and you very often just couldn't talk about a problem that stimulated the research, because that cast the individuals within that organization in a bad light. I'm particularly thinking of a fantastic story I came about that could never use, I think in the energy sector, where they were looking at leadership and kind of the top team here and how they approached things, and they found they couldn't make any development in helping these people to be better leaders because they couldn't admit a fault ever. So they kind of went in a roundabout way and produced a magazine for them so that they wouldn't feel as if they were being shown up in any way. But and of course it went further than that. But the ins and outs of that story is really interesting. Of course, it never gets told. Academics often complain that workplace learning is a bit of a black book because they never get to hear those. So yeah, I think that's a really valuable insight.
And I think, I understand this, the confidentiality part, etc. But what I also see from companies who are very open about how they approach L&D is also a way for an employer branding thing, if a candidate for a position could see, oh, this is how they do learning and development. They have, quarterly L&D day. You get this much of learning budget. This is how they develop their L&D strategy, etc. Like for me, as a candidate, that would really, especially now, as you hear everyone's talking about, a lot of people, when they look for jobs, they want to learn, they want to grow. And what's the best way to know if the organization is the right learning environment for you than knowing how they approach learning and development in the organization? And when we talk about competition and this kind of stuff, I think in Berlin, because the L&D professionals are quite well connected to each other. So I would probably know, this is how this startup is doing their L&D and this startup is doing their L&D. It's all for everyone's. I think what probably drives it as well is because, as I mentioned at the beginning, doing L&D in startup, you have to invent a lot of stuff. Mm-hmm. And it's nice to hear how other people invent so that you could then reinvent it in your context. And everyone's benefit from it. The organization benefits from it, the employee benefits from it, and the L&D professionals definitely, because that's how I learned a lot in the last 4 years now in L&D startup.
How helpful have you found the theoretical literature, if at all, in informing your approach?
So for me, I remember the first time I joined a talk or an event with other L&D professionals, and then they started talking about all these terminologies, I just noted everything down because I had no idea what they are. And then so I had a phase and I'm still doing it regularly. I still refer to literature. I still refer to the Bibles of L&D, the ones that are created with a real framework and all this kind of stuff. So I do use that as a basis, because I think that's if you approach things scientifically, you also don't want to invent from zero and start from doing something that is already proven and necessary. 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So I do inform myself by reading this the old books of L&D and the theoretical framework for things. My way of doing it these days is by following these people on LinkedIn. So they are the one who would update me if there is any additional theory that's being debunked or being updated. So I do use that because, as I've said, like if it's been done, it's been proven wrong, or it's been proven right, then it should be something that you build on top.
And I'm sure you use podcasts as well to inform you about those things. I'm going to stop short of a plug there for Great Minds on Learning, but oops, there I did it. So looking to the future now, when we talk about the future, particularly about issues such as climate, it's notable that young people care more about it than older people, because the future is where you're going to live and not where we're going to live. When it comes to technology innovation, it seems to be older people, strangely, who worry more about things like generative AI displacing a lot of jobs that are currently done by human knowledge workers. I mean, really, it's not going to be my problem if generative AI replaces jobs. It's more a consideration for your generation. But to the extent that such worries are not just technophobia, to which old people tend to be more subject, how do you feel about a future where AI starts to take over bits of decision making and strategic judgment? How worried should people be? Is worry really the right thing, the right way of addressing that problem?
Me personally, when I started working in this space, when I was in digital transformation, AI was already a discussion at that time. Yeah. And I did a lot of interviews with leaders, with employees. How do you perceive AI? And I remember at that time how in this conservative industries, they were like, it's something very far away and it's not going to happen within my lifetime, etc., etc. So whenever I see that their industry is now being taken over by AI, I just chuckled. And I was like, well, I wondered what those people now say to these changes. But I personally always think, like when I first learned about AI and everyone was worrying, and I was like, why are you worried? I hate manual work. I hate repetitive tasks. Like, wouldn't it be nice for an AI or whatever technology out there to take this repetitive, boring, mundane activities so that I could focus on creative work? I could focus on things that an AI couldn't do yet. So when AI was still at that stage, automatizing manual processes, I was already a big fan of it. It's like, yes, please take all of those repetitive tasks from me. Please do it, and then I'll be focusing on creative work, etc. And now, since we're talking about AI already reaching a new phase of development where they are able to also perhaps at some point doing decision making and then also creating strategic decision. I'm not worried. Or like, if the question, how worried should people be? Like, for me, my answer to this kind of question is always like, there is no point of fighting change. It's gonna happen anyway. You just learn to live with it. By two things. First of all, focusing on things that as human being would better do than AI, like creative thoughts, and like only human being can do something that previous human being cannot do. So there are things that, like, if you focus on enhancing your creative works, making strategic thinkings, facing complex problems, etc., then it's like, that's how you make sure that you're irreplaceable by AI. And second thing, I tend to be more in the first, like focusing my energy on the first part. But then on the second thing is also to be friends with it, to to know what it is, because I think what a lot of people are like, AI way too complicated for me, don't know about it anyway, I don't think it's gonna change my life to a degree that I would be sad about. That's also not helpful. I think it's now with a lot of discussion about ChatGPT and how it affects L&D. I haven't really tested it myself, like thoroughly, but I've seen a couple of people who are already testing it and saying, hey, this is how you could implement or how you could benefit from ChatGPT for L&D. And I saw that, there are so many manual tasks that can now be outsourced to ChatGPT or to AI. And I'm like, I'm gonna take benefit from that and still follow it closely, but not just closing myself off and saying, or you mentioned, technophobia, and just set it aside. Because then I don't want to be those people who I interviewed 6 years ago who said AI will not replace their work, will not affect their industry, and are now crying at the corner, losing their job, and having taken the time to upskill themselves and beat AI in their job.
I suppose the attitude is there, the way that AI has crept into everything. I found this with kind of sound engineering, that you start to get plugins that use AI to take noise out of badly recorded tracks and stuff like that. Not that we ever have badly recorded tracks on the Learning Hub. Actually, we have had a few problems, but I mean, all kind of equipment goes a bit wrong, and you do live recordings. There are now extraordinarily sophisticated plugins that use AI to kind of take that stuff out. So it's like, here's a useful tool. There's another tool, and ChatGPT just seems to me like another useful tool. Perhaps there is a point where the tools get so smart that they're smarter than the humans, but personally, I still feel that's a long way off. Do you?
For me, being a millennials, I think like my generation is the one who still saw offline things. Like we still know what cassette and CD is, whereas the
VHS. Would you recognize a VHS?
No, not really. But that's why when the question is, will you see it in your lifetime? I tend to say yes, or I tend to say, that's probably going to happen, just because I've witnessed how technology has has made leaps and bounds within my lifetime only. I was still part of the generation who knows what it feels to just play outside without having to debate, should I just play with my iPad? Because iPad was not an option yet at that time. So for me, seeing I'm now closing to 30, and it's not even half, hopefully, not even half of my lifetime. And I've seen such an advancement. That's why when I think about it, it's very probable that AI will be smarter than me at some point in making decisions. How fast would it be? Will I experience it when I'm 80 or when I'm 60? In whatever case, I'm pretty optimistic that I'll see it in my lifetime. But as I mentioned at the beginning, what I could do is to enhance my human skills, the things that at least at this point, I know human could do better than AI. While at the same time keeping a close watch to the development, because then otherwise I'll probably miss the train and not able to adjust with how AI is taking over our work. But yeah, it's an exciting time for me. As I've said, a lot of people are afraid. I'm usually more the very optimistic one, the more excited one, because I think that will probably help us solve a lot of problems that we think we cannot solve right now. And that's a very nice things to looking forward to.
Judy, I think AI is going to have to be very smart to be smarter than you. So lastly, where best can people follow your thought and your future career?
On LinkedIn.
Yeah.
So I'm not a full-on content creator. I probably update every month or so, but that's where I usually share updates or share what I found, what I learned, and also exchange with others, with other learning professionals. So yeah, that's the only social media, actually. I don't have Twitter or any kind of other stuff.
No Twitter? Oh.
No.
Okay. We'll put your LinkedIn profile in the show notes though. So thank you very much for sharing your time with us today.
Thank you for the opportunity. Nice chatting with you.
That's all on the Learning Hack podcast for this time. Many thanks to our guest and to our sponsors. The Learning Hack is completely independent and transparently funded by sponsorship and your Patreon contributions. If you want to help others find us, please like, follow, rate, review and subscribe on your podcast platform of choice or on YouTube. And you can contribute at patreon.com/learninghack.
Next time, on this podcast all about learning, we talk to Adam Lacey, whose company Assemble U makes actual learning podcasts. Till then,
stay forever young, learning people.
Now I finally get it.